Hello, welcome to What is this weapon? And unfortunately the answer, spoiler alert, is not a clue. The other week we had the big reveal of our what was technically our only unknown item from the Pattern Room collection, in that it was the only one in a slot in a rack that said unknown, and I was happily able to carry that off to somewhere that made sense and throw away the unknown label. But I had forgotten about this thing. In one of the back stores, deep storage, shall we say, not on not readily visible to those that access this collection. And you might say, for good reason, this is pretty weird. So I think you can see that it's some sort of submachine gun. It's clearly an early prototype of some sort. Whoa, where to start? Well, identifiable bits. Clearly, we have a Sterling submachine gun magazine sticking out the bottom, 34 rounds. Now, an absolute first in my time studying firearms, this is clamped in place with 2 screws, or bolts, I guess, and some nuts. There is no magazine catch. There is no way to pull it out. This is the closest I've seen to some of the video games that don't really get reloads right, where you literally just rip the magazine out and shove another one in. But you'd have to back off these Allen bolts to do that. So Sterling magazine, now sitting at the wrong angle, I think, because there's a, well, I was going to say witness mark, but I think it's been scored in there. So it should, I think, be canted further forward for optimal feeding. And then we have a couple of other parts that some of you will already have spotted. L1A1 self-loading rifle, FNFAL variant, of course, British pistol grip. And handguard. And the barrel, there is a barrel in there, trust me. I'll see if I can remove this screw. It's more of an Allen screw. And take those off in a moment, but those are L1A1 handguards as well. So L1A1 furniture, L2A3 magazine, everything else is made up from flat bits of sheet metal bent into shape. So the receiver is made of 2 plates screwed together, bottomless, can see you through that, with the top rolled over and turned into rails for the bolt, which top cocking handle, knurled cocking handle. So there's knurling on the cocking handle, despite how crude everything else is. Visible machining marks, we'd expect that, of course. This is an early prototype, proof of concept of some sort. And we see that this is actually some sort of delayed blowback system in there, by the look of it. But I'm coming to this cold, I hasten to add. I'm expecting you guys in the comments to go wild on speculating on how this works. And perhaps Ian would like to come in and look at this one day, and we dare take it apart to get into the detail of what exactly they're trying to do here. I haven't been able to turn up any patent or anything. We do know a bit about where it comes from and who designed it. So I've left this label on, paper label, received from Interarms, 12th of February 1996. That gives us a later date for this. Plastic SLR furniture is 1970, 71 onwards. So sometime between those dates, I would guess 1980s. And this is not Interarms USA, but it is a subsidiary of that. So Sam Cummings, kind of firearms empire, dealing, importing, manufacturing, but I think under contract to other actual manufacturing companies, as far as I know. PPKS. Those of you in the States may well have heard of Interarms. Big company operating, I think, from the 50s to the 90s. They do come up in the documentation quite a bit. And this is a design, someone from the Pattern Room has left a note to say that this is the work of John Sayers, a director of Interarms UK, I believe. So this is his design. Great big trigger hanging down underneath here. There's a really unusual, even the trigger spring is unusual. It's wrapped around the axis pin for the hammer, and then there's a sort of head on there and there's a peg or pin through the top of the trigger that bears down on that spring. Now that spring is double-sided, so where my fingertip is one side, there's the other side. But even that is a wacky way to do a trigger spring. So just a trigger that flaps in the breeze, and it only hits the spring at that point and gives you the ability to return the trigger back where it started. That's the point of a trigger spring. Otherwise, you can't keep pulling the trigger. And then in front of that is the hammer, which you can see the top of there. We'll get you some close-ups on these, but I don't dare to remove all these Allen screws just yet. And the bolt, here is of course your guide rod and recoil spring. There is no cover over the top here. Had this gone anywhere, clearly it would have ended up with some sort of cover over the top. Now, this is intriguing. There's something going on here. I think this is a form of gas operation that we're seeing here. So you're learning along with me here. I normally do all this ahead of time and try my best to get it right for you. This one was so bizarre, I thought let's just throw it in front of the camera. But we can, when we pull this bolt back along its guide rod, this is the rod obviously, there is a striking face on the front of the bolt there. And then there is a little, what appears to be a little piston there. My best guess is, because there's no piston system under the handguard, is that we have a chamber-based gas piston system, and that is driving a tappet, a small piston back, so it protrudes slightly out, gives this carrier a whack, and knocks this thing to the rear. It shouldn't hang up. I'm loath to bend the magazine out of the way, but I'll just have to assist it again. So that's it at its rearward travel. It would then come forward. There's a little ejector, sticks out the front, bottom of the bolt. There's an extractor on the face of the bolt. These are normal features, of course. But yeah, there's that striking surface for what appears to be a gas piston. So as janky as this thing looks, it would appear to be a fairly early attempt at a gas-operated submachine gun. Something that we've seen with the MP7, the SIG MPX. Not many go this route because blowback is usually just cheaper and easier to do. This appears to be that, but it's not tapping off gas down the barrel. It appears to be doing so within the chamber. Let's just see if we can have a look under the handguard just to confirm what I'm seeing here. There we go, standard SLR handguards. And yeah, sure enough, it's just a big, heavy pistol caliber barrel. Weirdly slim at this point, but very heavy up here. Well, yeah, normal thickness here. Turned right down here, interestingly. Actually, I think we can go a little bit further than that. So, let's see if we can prove my little ad hoc hypothesis here. This adjustment thing simply pulls out. I say adjustment, I'm not even sure that's what it's for, but we'll put that there. And we then unscrew what I believe to be a gas plug, which is it's all partway out anyway. And it is a gas plug. It has two apertures, a tiny one, which you may not even be able to see unless we punch in for you, and a bigger one. So those of you familiar with gas-operated firearms with any kind of adjustable gas block, normally up here somewhere, you rotate the gas plug to the aperture that gives you the effect that you want. So a bigger hole means more gas comes out, means a more violent action, overcomes dirt or fouling or whatever. Or you might adjust it for using with a suppressor, or you might switch it off for launching grenades. So this is absolutely a gas-operated weapon. So I'm slightly relieved that that was correct. So that's the gas plug, which means that ought to be a piston. So if we poke it up and out, there it is. It's a tiny piston. Or tappet, I suppose you could call it. So that's the outer surface that protrudes. In fact, let's see if we'll put it back in, and I'll see if I can. This is staying locked open on the magazine, which it shouldn't do. That's just the magazine being at the wrong attitude. Let's poke this back into place. This assumes it will go back into place, of course. There we go. Yes, so there we go. So under gas pressure, your little piston juts out, smacks into the front of the bolt carrier, unlocks the bolt, and the whole thing comes to the rear against spring pressure, extracts an ejector case, and then goes forward again. Obviously, the piston is then reasserted forwards. Bolt is locked again, so all that nasty gas pressure is kept in place in the chamber, and we're ready for another shot. Or if we held the trigger down, the whole thing would continue, obviously, to happen. And in fact, the trigger mechanism is fairly straightforward, full auto only, as far as I can determine. So there we go. This is a prototype, gas-operated, a British prototype gas-operated submachine gun. What an interesting, weird thing at a very early stage of development. So this is probably what you would now tinker on a CAD program first. You design it in 3D before you started bolting bits of steel block and plate and bar stock together into a potentially functioning weapon. But do you know what? I'm not going to try and load this up and fire it. So, having stared at this for a little bit longer, I believe I've figured out the bolt carrier group here. So, knots blow back because pulling back on the actual bolt section doesn't do anything. You have to pull back on this. So, manually operating it is as simple as pulling back on the cocking handle. That unlocks this somehow, and the whole thing comes back. The way that's happening is rollers. So, I have spotted quite a relatively slick disassembly here for this. So guide rod and spring comes out. This buffer / stop comes out. And the whole bolt carrier group comes up to this point where it can come up out of the receiver. So there's our fixed ejector that we'll show you a close-up of when it's together, so it makes more sense. And there is the bolt and bolt carrier. So bolt carrier. So this is what gets thwacked to unlock, and the way it's unlocking is basic. This is the closest thing I can think of is the German wartime Gerät 06. The version we've got that has the gas piston still in it. Before they realised you could just do delaying of the action, because you've got to keep that gas pressure under control until it's dropped to a safe level. They realised they could do that with just rollers. That's how we get things like the G3, the MP5, all of that. So it's roller locked. You can see the rollers either side. We'll give you a close-up of this in situ so you can see them. You can just see them from outside. I didn't spot them right away, I will admit, but they are there. And there is the firing pin, rear of the firing pin, that when this is in battery, like that, means that the firing pin can be struck by the hammer, pop out the front, hit the cap, fire the cartridge, and set that whole process in motion. So this is way more intriguing than it looked at first glance. Now we can see with the carrier bit to the rear, the rollers are free to drop in, so they're not locking, they're not sticking out. There's actually a safety system here, so we have to press down a lever to push the carrier forward. There we go. And as we push forward, there's a wedge inside that causes these to pop out. So just like an MP5 or the Gerät 06, more so. In the rear position, the rollers are free to pop in, and the whole thing can go forward and close behind the case, and then we push the whole thing forward and out pop the rollers. Where the rollers go? Well, there are two locking shoulders inside here that are part of sort of a screw bolt type system. So you screw them in from either side, and they give you locking surfaces in here and in here. Again, we'll show you a close up that the rollers pop out into, and that's what locks the whole thing shut. In case you haven't spotted it, because I've been frantically waving this around, the firing pin, back of the firing pin, is there. That's struck by the hammer when it flies forward. Very weak hammer spring. Very weak hammer spring there. What I didn't fully explain earlier is that spring setup it's on the axis of the hammer spring because it is the hammer spring. It does double duty. So the trigger spring is the hammer spring. What an interesting thing. And I'm struggling to think of much earlier than 1980s for a gas-operated submachine gun, but I'm sure somebody can think of one. We do, I suspect, have some sort of buffer setup or a nod toward a buffer in the back here. There's nothing that appears to be doing any buffering, but there's just a piece of cylindrical steel set into this block here, which holds the recoil spring and guide rod. So I would imagine there's some sort of rubber buffer or some other system would have to go in there if this thing had gone any further. And then all we've got really is this retaining ring for the handguard. There's a front sight block, missing a front sight. This is from something else as well, which is escaping me at the moment. And hopefully by the time this hits the YouTubes, I will have identified what this is. It's a commercial block, front sight / gas block. Probably a front sight block for something, I think, because it's finished in a sort of phosphate. It has an offset dovetail for a front sight blade that isn't in there, and it has a slot for a cocking tube or a gas tube or something there. So that I think is the furniture, the magazine, and I think this are the only firearm components on this whole thing. The rest is homemade. Workshop made. Shed made. It's the archetypal British bloke in a shed, doing what the British bloke in a shed does. So there we are. Quite the voyage of discovery with this thing. Actually picked this up thinking that this would be much simpler than it actually is. But just to sort of reprise, what we have here is a chamber gas block, so gas operated and roller locked submachine gun, 9mm. So a long way away from being finished, safe to say, but essentially a test bed for an idea that has been successful later on. Again, MP7, HK MP7, SIG MPX. If you want, in theory, something more accurate and perhaps controllable, depending on whether you care about the clunk of an open bolt, but even a closed bolt blowback weapon like a UMP, you have to have a big old heavy bolt in there. A gas system, whether you lock it with a lever or a tilting bolt, or in this case, rollers, is in theory superior, and people have come back to this. So Mr. Sayers was, in theory, onto a winner here. It's just the crude nature of the thing sort of belies that. Thanks for watching, guys. Please do remember, like, subscribe, all of the usual YouTube stuff, but also we have a shop here at the Royal Armouries, online and of course on site at Fort Nelson as well as in Leeds. And they've asked me to show you this range of, well, I was going to say new books. They are new. They're from the Royal Armouries, our publishing side, but they are reprints of Second World War Home Guard training material, which are really interesting and valuable historical sources, but also quite fun in a sense, in terms of how the period way in which they're written and the illustrations that you'll find within. So if you're interested, these are retailing at £7. And we also have a 3 for 2 deal that means you can get more of them for less as well. So please do keep an eye out for those. We also have on at the moment our big Gladiators exhibition here at Leeds. That is open now until 2nd of November. So please, if you can, come and see that. Catch it while it's here. A number of things in there that you won't see anywhere else, unless you're lucky enough to make it to somewhere like the Naples Museum of Archaeology, where some of that stuff has come from. I've seen it and I definitely recommend it. But whatever happens, please do join us here again next week.